Picture the Oregon coast. Imagine rugged cliffs against crashing waves. The air is crisp, filled with the salty tang of the sea. Seagulls cry overhead. Tourists stroll along the beach, breathing in the fresh air. This is nature at its finest, a place of peace and tranquility. At least that's usually the case. But in November 1970, this peaceful scene was disrupted. A very large, very dead guest arrived on the shores of Florence, Oregon. This wasn't just any visitor. It was a 45-foot, 8-ton sperm whale. Now, dead things on beaches aren't exactly unheard of, especially on a coast as vast as Oregon's. Seagulls might scavenge a bit, the tide might take some things out. Nature has a way. But this whale was a problem of epic proportions. There's no delicate way to say this. Dead whales are stinky. Like really stinky. And this whale, with 8 tons of decomposing flesh baking under the Oregon sun, was an olfactory nightmare. The smell was unbearable, a nauseating blend of rotten fish and something far worse. It wafted over Florence, driving residents indoors and chasing tourists away. The beaches were off limits. The air was thick with the stench. Something had to be done. But what do you do with an 8-ton rotting whale? This was uncharted territory, even for the experienced folks at the Oregon State Highway Division, who drew the short straw, or perhaps the long, smelly one, in this situation. Now, the Oregon State Highway Division weren't experts in whale disposal. They were more accustomed to dealing with things like roads and bridges. But they were in charge, and a decision had to be made. Someone, somewhere, in a moment of what can only be described as inspired thinking, came up with a plan Dynamite. Yes, dynamite. The thinking, as far as anyone can tell, was this: blow the whale up, the seagulls eat the smaller pieces, problem solved. It seemed like a good idea at the time, perhaps. Or maybe it was the smell clouding their judgment. Whatever the reason, the decision was made. The men of the Oregon State Highway Division would become whale demolition experts. What could possibly go wrong? Word spread through Florence about the planned detonation. People were, well, intrigued, to say the least. Some were skeptical, others were downright terrified. But everyone was curious. On the day of the event, a crowd gathered on a nearby bluff, eager to witness this unusual spectacle. The Highway Division crew, clad in hard hats and armed with their dynamite, approached the whale with a mixture of trepidation and bravado. They planted the explosives carefully, hoping for the best, but bracing for the worst. The anticipation was thick enough to cut with a knife. Or perhaps that was just the smell. The explosion, when it came, was something to behold. It wasn't so much a bang as it was a blubbery boom. A geyser of sand, seawater, and whale guts erupted into the air, reaching heights that would make a geyser blush. The crowd gasped, then cheered, then probably gasped again as chunks of whale rained down around them. The smell, if you can imagine, was even worse. But the real kicker? A car parked a quarter of a mile away, minding its own business, was suddenly and dramatically dented by a hefty chunk of flying whale blubber. It seems nature, even when being blown up, has a strange sense of humor. The aftermath of the explosion was, to put it mildly, messy. The seagulls, faced with such an overwhelming bounty, didn't know where to begin. The smell, far from being eradicated, was amplified, clinging to Florence like a bad cologne. And that poor car owner. Let's just say the insurance claim was met with a healthy dose of skepticism. The exploding whale of Florence became a legend, a cautionary tale about the perils of interfering with nature. The moral of the story? Sometimes it's best to let nature take its course. Or, if you absolutely must blow up a whale, make sure there are no cars parked within a quarter-mile radius. And maybe invest in some industrial-strength air freshener.
Comment your theories below. And don't forget to subscribe for more historical mysteries.